to more about why it is that consciousness cannot be reduced simply to mechanistic processes?
Well, you see, I'm very careful to say I'm not talking about consciousness in all its aspects.
Yes.
For example, I mean, I have nothing to say about the perception of the color green, for instance. I mean, sure, there's something going on which makes green have a certain impression on one. But this is not what I'm talking about. And probably most of the things that we think about when we talk about consciousness are not what I'm talking about. So I'm only talking about a very specific part of what consciousness does. And the argument is that if this is something which is not a computational process, then it sort of sheds a question mark on the whole thing. But it's only very specific to the question of understanding. So I tend to make that point clear. And understanding is something which, certainly in the normal usage of the word, implies conscious. I mean, you wouldn't say of a device normally that it understands something without it being aware of something. And aware means being conscious of it. So that's just normal usage, and I'm going along with that. So I don't know what most of these words mean, but I would say that understanding is something which requires consciousness.
Yes, is one way into this to speak about, I mean, so much of our thinking, of course, is calculative. There's a goal there, we're calculating how to get to it, so there's a huge amount of life that is like that. But to then ask the question about why this is a goal, or why this is worthy of being a goal, or what would make it worthy of being a goal, or what would make that worthy of being a justification for that to be a goal, the kinds of thinking that you have to engage in order to reflect upon the nature of the ends and purposes, is distinct from the kinds of thinking you engage in to calculate your way to a goal. And that seems to point towards the realm, or a kind of thinking or awareness that is clearly distinct from a simply mechanistic calculation.
Yes. I mean, I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. It's just that it's hard to know whether those things could be put into a computational system. Mm-hmm. The reason for concentrating on this very specific area is that I can say something about it, that's all. Mm-hmm. So the particular area is mathematical proof. I see most people don't bother themselves with mathematical proof, and they're conscious too. So I'm certainly not saying that's an indicator of consciousness. I mean, I'm saying it is something which requires consciousness, but I'm completely accept that there are all sorts of other aspects of consciousness which are going on all the time and which are much more important. I've gone along with that too. But it's just that if you can find something in what consciousness seems to do which is demonstrably not computational, that's saying something. And that's the limited little thing I'm trying to say.
Now, you started working with Hameroff, as I understand it, to try to provide something approximating a localization or a neurophysiological account of what this non-deterministic process might be.
But I didn't say that's usually non-deterministic. That's different.
Okay.
See, it's very easy to confuse the two.
Well, and I am confused about them, apparently.
Now, you see, non-deterministic means that rules don't have a clear statement about what happens next. And maybe there is a choice about what happens next. And that choice might be random, or maybe choice in some more personal sense, that you have a reason. I don't know. But usually one talks about randomness there. You say that the theory does not have a complete description of what it tells you happens in the future, because there is a random element in it. And the way quantum mechanics...
In the future, random element in the future.
In the future. That's what normally, the way in which one talks about quantum mechanics normally. I mean, I have...
Right. And that's a truly random feature, so it's not predictable.
In current quantum mechanics, that's correct, yes.
Okay, so that's what I was referring to when I was referring to the indeterminacy of the future horizon. It was that randomness that I was trying to point to.
Yes, well, you see, I mean, but it is another question. You can have a random device which is otherwise computational. I mean, it just, you put in at certain points, okay, do something randomly. Thing is, I don't think an interesting question there. I don't think that gives you anything in the way of establishing results which seem to be a non-computational process, like with the Gödel thing.
Okay, so there's an evolutionary answer to the problem of emergent randomness, and the answer is, so a mosquito's a good example.
Yeah.
Or a fish, any animal that lays a tremendous number of eggs that could conceivably march to maturity. So there's genetic mutation in all, so maybe let's say, just for the sake of argument, that a given mosquito lays 1 million eggs, fertile eggs in its lifetime.
Yeah.
Now, there's variation in those mosquito patterns, and at least a certain amount of that variation is random. That's a consequence, and it's actually a consequence, I would say, of events that are actually manifesting themselves in some sense at a quantum level, because at least some of the mutations are caused by radiation. And so there's disruption at a molecular level. And so evolution seems to be able to use the admixture of randomness into structure as a means of dealing with the indeterminacy of the future. And to some degree it does that through death, right? Because of those 1 million mosquitoes, on average, only one manages to propagate itself to reproduction, or we'd be knee-deep in mosquitoes and like...
No, I understand what you're saying, yes. But what I'm trying to say is that what's going on with consciousness is different from that. Because I don't see how this, you putting randomness in the way you're suggesting, clearly that is an important aspect to evolution and so on. I certainly wouldn't deny that at all. But it's not the same thing. So that
consciousness isn't producing randomness in response to indeterminacy.
Yes, it's when I say non-computational, I don't mean that it's random at certain times. I mean something quite different.
So let's zero in on that. So, because I'm very curious about what you do mean. I mean, this is obviously a tremendously important distinction between the computational algorithmic domain and something that's in some sense outside of it. And I'm struggling to understand at the most detailed level, let's say, how you envision the structure and function of consciousness, or maybe just the function. It's not producing mere random variance, and that can't be, because random is too widespread. So at the very least, so for example, if you study creative people, we've done a lot of this, there's in some sense more randomness in their speech, because imagine that if you utter a given word, there's a certain probability that another word will emerge in the field around that. The creative people use lower probability concepts and words in their approach. So there's a kind of randomness. They go farther out into the word association field, and that does help them generate more creative solutions. But that's not, if that becomes unconstrained to too great a degree, you get, maybe like a manic creativity that's counterproductive and too random. People are jumping too much from disconnected point to disconnected point. So consciousness doesn't seem to be, creative consciousness doesn't seem to be a mere random walk. So that's a psychological take on that. But so what do you think, I'm still struggling to understand what you think consciousness does. It does understand.
Yes. You see, I think probably you're trying to make me be more specific than I can be, because I don't know what it is that, how to make a device that can understand something. So I'm just trying to say that whatever understanding is, it's not a computational process. And that's the argument.
Okay, I see.
No, it's not.
So you're not trying to specify what it might be. You're just saying it has to be something that's non-computational.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Is there a fundamental link? I mean, when we say it is not non-computational, does that mean, or does that not mean, by definition, that consciousness in some deep level is free?
No,
it does not.
That's right. I'm not saying, I mean, these are open questions. I'm not saying that. I mean, maybe there is an aspect of indeterminism in it, and that could be. But that's not what I'm saying. And the trouble is, I think it's not a concept which people appreciate usually. So I can give you examples of non-computational things. And one of the examples I often give is if you imagine a pattern of squares, equal squares or just a normal square array, and you can consider a finite shape made out of squares. I think it's called a polyomino, shape made out of squares. And if you're given a finite set of these polyominoes, and the question is, can you cover the plane with those shapes, only those shapes, no gaps, no overlaps? Now that question, the answer yes or no, the answer is definite yes or no. Either you can or you can't. But it's not an algorithmic process. It's shown mathematically that there is no algorithm which can tell you yes or no whether these shapes will cover the plane.